I guess I can start with a memory from my childhood. Back then, I was in elementary school and the world was still whole. My sister was alive. My little brother didn't hate me, and my parents didn't know I had inherited their grandparents' corruption magic. They had no clue that the horns on my head were more than just vestiges of our family's bloodline. They thought I was just a normal kid, and I thought so too. My twin sister was the same as me, having a stubby black horn jut out of her head like that of a unicorn. But for all we cared, those were just visual quirks. A few years later, my little brother was born, and he too quickly developed the Kathlen siblings' signature horned look. Though my little brother arguably got lucky. His horns were the least jarring looking out of the three of us. At the very least, they were symmetrical and didn't sprout directly out of his forehead like that of my sister's. We were pretty happy, honestly. I think that was the closest thing to happy I ever experienced. But it would just be a matter of time until the illusion broke, and our parents realized the kinds of monsters us precious children ended up being. Because one day, when I came back home from school, I was met by two angry pairs of eyes leering at me from the dining room table. I was a relatively short kid, kinda scrawny looking too, and overall I had a very unimpressive look. The only thing that made people wary were those horns that I mentioned. They look so misshapen and out of place, and the asymmetry only adds to the unpleasant look. I learned early on to ignore people's stares or otherwise to scare them off by making wild grimaces and penetrating stares back at them. I didn't like being seen as other, but it also gave me a sense of self. A sense of confidence, like I was special and therefore people had to be wary of me. It's what separated me from the others. Though, don't get me wrong, I wasn't one of those weird, shy kids. I was seen as cool because I ignored the teachers and got perfect grades anyway, making the other kids think I'm some sort of super genius. I am, of course, but back then, school was just so easy. Anyone with half a brain cell could flunk their way through. Anyway, back to the story. When I came back from school that day, my parents said that they got a phone call. Apparently, one of the other parents got riled up after their daughter came home, shaking and seemingly traumatized. The parent accused me of bullying and harassing her, a second grader called Jess. My parents sounded super livid when they told me what they had heard on the phone, and I was very confused, because all I had done that day was play hide and seek with Jess and a few of the other kids at school. I did scare her when I revealed myself hiding on the roof of the school's stone entrance, but other than that, nothing happened. It was just a regular day to me. Apparently, Jess said that I put on scary face paint and made my eyes look all freaky, and that I had bat wings and a bunch of weird tentacles behind me when I jumped at her and tried to eat her. It was the first time I had ever slipped into my grey version, a form others always describe as demonic looking, and it would take my parents years to finally tell me the whole truth about it. My mother's family tree is permanently stained with corruption magic. No matter how distantly related, our corruption would always find its way to one of the descendants. It may skip a generation or two, like it did with my mom and her siblings, but it would always come back. And this was exactly the case for me, my twin sister, and little brother. We were the new generation of grey demons, and I was the first one to figure out how to shift. This shifting started out as a fun trick, nothing too serious, but it would spell a huge headache later down the line. My mom especially hated this corruption bloodline. She hated that all three of her children had ugly black horns protruding out of their skulls, similar to her own long, blade-like horns. She hated how the Kathlen family was continuing this reputation of being grey demons. But what she hated above all else was the fact that I loved it. I love the idea of our family bloodline being inescapably tied to corruption magic, and I want to know everything I could possibly dig up about our family's history, as well as anything relating to corruption magic. Can this thing be traced? Can I find out the biology of a grey demon, or does it have more to do with the ambiguous corruption magic that seems to permeate our world like an illness? Why does this corruption cause such varying symptoms depending on the person's heritage? What I just read to you was a small introduction to the character you see on screen, Wren Kathlen. He's been a very important character in my art journey ever since I started drawing my comic art adoption, which you can read on Webtoons. The way I like writing characters makes me imagine them in front of me, and in many ways they become a sort of imaginary friend or acquaintance. They follow me throughout my day and talk to me and comment on things that I see or that happen around me. I try to imagine what their opinions might be on certain things, and how they'd react if they were in my situation. I feel like this makes the writing process a bit more natural and more authentic. So whenever Wren is with me, I can feel a sense of apathy. He's a very low energy type of person, and he only really feels things if the situation is extreme. I guess that's the reason why he is such a troublemaker. He's someone who doesn't feel the little feelings, so he needs to seek out any kind of emotional stimulation in order to experience actual emotions. So I guess it's not a surprise, then, that he has a huge social circle of friends and lovers, all of whom are cycled out and replaced as time passes, and as he loses interest in all of them, or he otherwise is scared away by how intensely he begins to care about them. That's another thing I noticed about him. He's very scared of commitment. Commitment of any kind. And what greater commitments can there be than the commitment to being someone's friend or even partner? And I guess I could go on and on about other things I've noticed about him, but I think I would like to finish this video with this one last story. My twin sister Merle was such a little pest to most people who knew her. She always got into trouble around the neighborhood or at school. My parents genuinely did not know what to do with her. She'd beat up any boy who was taller than her at school, and yell around the classroom just because she got bored from doing those repetitive math assignments. Then there were those weird pranks she did, where she'd pick up a bunch of scrapped school papers and go stuff mailboxes of the people she didn't like full of science homework and Sudoku puzzles. Honestly, I still think that's pretty genius of her to do as a 6-year-old. If you asked the teachers at her school, or the old couple across the street, what they envisioned the devil to look like, they'd have imagined green eyes, a black horn, and an upturned nose, for sure. She was a nightmare. But the thing was, my sister never acted like that at home. During the time she was allowed indoors, she was fine. She even did chores on her own, like washing dishes or brooming the balcony. She loved that balcony especially, because she'd always plant poppy flowers and other random seeds she found around the area. I'd tease her about it and tell her to plant real flowers, not those weird pesky weeds everyone wants to get rid of when they got an actual garden to grow. But she didn't care. My sister had 2 personalities, basically. The one you got when she was at home, and the one she morphed into whenever she got forced outside of home. My dad didn't understand, neither did my mom, and they both thought that she needed to be taught a lesson in good behavior. They sent her to our granny, who was a bird breeder. Those pesky little birds called heart sparrows were all the rage back in the day, especially as pets, because of their stupidly large heart shapes on their chests. Merle was supposed to help around the birdhouse and keep things tidy. I have no clue how in the heck my parents thought that would solve the problem. After all, they could predict exactly what my sister was going to be like when she was not at home. But nope, they made a massive mistake sending her to that bird breeding house. As much as people find those sparrows cute, they are nothing but wild animals, and my sister one day decided to do one of her usual shenanigans, just this time inside the birdhouse. She angered one of those beasts, probably threw a rock at the damn oversized pigeon or something. She was killed by a heart sparrow, is what I'm trying to say. She was killed by an effing heart sparrow. I will not forget that day, and I will not ever trust any of those fucking birds. Merle was found in her grave version too, meaning she must have been trying to fight back. Those birds murdered her, and yet my grandma continued breeding those pests. And not too long after that, Wren's little brother, Robin, despite this traumatizing experience, would start working at that same heart sparrow breeding and adoption center. If you want to know how that turns out, that's exactly what the plot of my webcomic is all about, in case you missed my self-promotion earlier. Wren's life was marked early on by the death of a loved one, which might explain his obsession with death that develops as he becomes an adult. His apartment is filled with animals. Dead animals. Skeletons. Fossils, taxidermies, you name it. He's obsessed with death, and he's determined to understand everything about it. This also ties into his fascination with his family's bloodline and corruption magic. Oh, the amount of sacrifices he'd be willing to make in order to fully understand life, death, and corruption magic. Death is his biggest fear and yet also his biggest motivation. And that's about it for today's small character introduction. I hope you enjoyed listening to Wren's story as well as watching the illustrations on screen. Remember to keep your loved ones close and to not let your past consume you, as I feel that Wren might be stumbling onto a very dark path indeed with his interests. I hope to see you very soon in the Halloween Cafe. Goodbye.